It's going to be very different to my usual videos, and I'm getting back to horror films next, but I'm going to do a quick video on how on the 6th of June Reddit reached a turning point. In a post on the r/announcements subreddit, the CEO responded to themes arising from the Black Lives Matter protests and the looting and riots that accompanied them. And in that post, the mask slipped, and it's not an exaggeration to say Reddit has gone fully authoritarian. Now, that's quite a claim, and maybe some people have a very different understanding of what authoritarianism is, but it is right there in the blog post. I'm going to lay out the type of rules that might be there on a site. You can be completely unbiased by allowing free speech, as Reddit used to claim. This post is unflinching and just states it very clearly. Reddit is not a free speech site anymore. Then there might be some very sensible rules that unconscious bias gets to play around in. That's when moderators, officials, through no fault of their own, are going to pay more attention to troublesome posts and rule-breaking posts that go against their preferences, their biases, and be a lot more lenient on ones that conform to their beliefs. And this is going to be something we all do, you know. I know I'm going to end up being a lot more lenient on a film if it happens to tick a couple of boxes for me. That's not really something anyone could be blamed for. Then there's what you might call institutional or systemic bias. That's when you put out rules that look on the surface to be fair, but in practice inevitably target certain communities only. So a few examples of that might be banning conspiracy theories, which actually biases things very firmly in favour of the mainstream narrative. And in his interview with Twitter executives, Tim Pool highlights another one.
Your platform restricts speech.
Our platform promotes speech unless people violate our rules.
And in a specific direction.
In any direction.
But I don't want to say his name. The guy who calls for death gets a suspension. The guy who insinuates death gets a permanent ban.
But Tim, you're misinterpreting what I'm saying, and I feel like you're doing it deliberately. It's not about one particular thing. It's about a pattern and practice of violating our rules.
And you have a pattern and practice of banning only one faction of people.
I don't agree with that.
Quillette recently published an article where they looked at 22 high-profile bannings from 2015 and found 21 of them were only on one side of the cultural debate.
But I don't look at the political spectrum of people when I'm looking at their tweets.
Right, you have a bias.
I don't know who they are.
You're biased, and you're targeting specific individuals because your rules support this perspective.
No, I don't agree with that.
Well, so can you be clear, though, in like what rules support that perspective?
Specifically, the easiest one is misgendering, right? Because that's so clearly ideological. If you ask a conservative, what is misgendering? They'll say, if someone is biologically male and you call them, she, biologically male and you call them she, that's misgendering. That's a conservative view. The progressive view is inverted. So now you actually have in your policies a rule against the conservative perspective.
I have a rule against the abuse and harassment of trans people on our platform. That's what my rules against.
It's not always the case, but neutral-seeming rules often inherently take a position. But we are beyond that. Reddit is not there. Reddit was there. Reddit is authoritarian. It's an ethical site in the vein of the ethical state, as some historical dude might have put it. The CEO of Reddit, Spez, states it very clearly. On Reddit, the rules don't matter for people that they don't like. They won't make the mistake of prioritizing the rules over their values. Now that might sound noble, but if we translate that into real-world action, it means that people who did nothing wrong and stuck by the rules of the site as they agreed to, well, sod them, ban them anyway. Reddit is openly admitting their political and ideological bias and saying that it doesn't matter what you do. They don't want you on Reddit. If they don't like your politics, it doesn't matter that you behaved, that you stuck to the rules as diligently as possible. They'll kick you out, and there's nothing you can do about it. The CEO highlights the example of the Donald, and I think his example here really reveals how deep the ideological bias is. I don't think he's aware of how much the bias is showing here. The example of the Donald that's brought up here is so skewed, it shocked me. I'm not an expert on the Donald, I don't read it. Now he admits they didn't break the rules, they just dissented. And he says they voluntarily disintegrated, and no, that's completely an unbelievable interpretation. Reddit's power structure is firmly against Donald Trump, and a subreddit that loved him enraged them. They quarantined it to kill it, and when it still grew, they removed half the moderators and imposed left-wing mods. Autonomy, even in exile, is not allowed if Reddit dislikes you. The Donald disbanded because of intolerable conditions and because they were driven off the site, even while they kept to the rules. Again, I'm not an expert on the deep lore of particular subreddits, but if they broke the site by their engagement with other subreddits, well then r/against hate subreddits is going to have to go. They've been exposed numerous times for ban evasions and rule breaking, but well, hey, it doesn't matter. They conform to the Reddit paradigm. Reddit ignores brigading and bad behavior and rule breaking by subreddits who stick to their approved narrative. I'm sure someone who knows Reddit better than me is going to be able to point out a right-wing subreddit that is breaking the rules and getting away with it, hasn't been pressured, and all I'd say is, hasn't been pressured yet. The censor's focus never remains still, and the censor's idea of heresy only ever grows. I'm not going to discuss the value or the right and wrong of Reddit's specific bias. I'm sympathetic to a lot of it. That doesn't matter here. What matters is how they demonstrate and announce their bias. And when I say it's an interesting moment, it's because I talked about bias and censorship in terms of progression, but that's not a really true reflection of what's happened. Now, Reddit has admitted that it ignores its own rules to ban groups that it dislikes and to keep people that it likes. Now, that's the mask slipping. But what's going to happen now is that, as I say in the post, new rules will be written to expand the list of heresies. It's going to be very complex, very vague, and leave a heck of a lot of wiggle room so that they can carry on being biased. But the TLDR of this is rules for thee and not for me. What's important is that when Reddit writes these new rules, it doesn't just go back up to this phase, the institutional bias phase. The mask slipping is very real and very important. There is a huge difference between a regime that tells you new laws are coming and gives you time to obey them, and one that punishes you anyway because it wants to. As I said, the mask has slipped. Reddit is authoritarian. You can stick to these new rules, but if they don't want you, you're gone. The thing about authoritarianism is that a lot of people misunderstand it. People think authoritarianism is a strict imposition of rules, and that's wrong. Ironically enough, it's the complete opposite, because in authoritarianism, the rules do not matter at all. The rules are whatever the dear leader says they are at any given time. You really think you can stand up to dear leader or il duce and say, excuse me, I stuck to the letter of the law here, you can't do this to me. That is not how authoritarianism works. As with political correctness, it doesn't matter if it's true. It matters if it matches the narrative. On Reddit, it doesn't matter what you do, only that you fall in line. But Reddit is not the site it was, and things are only going to get worse. Like I said, I'm back to the horror next, but this was a weird thing. I wanted to note it. Tschüss, y'all.